So the Aeneid by Virgil. The Aeneid was written by Virgil is considered the greatest Roman poet, the greatest poet to write in Latin, and he was considered that way by the other Romans too. He was the man. Um, he lived around the time of the Emperor Augustus, which was who was the first great Roman emperor, first real Roman emperor, and the first great one, and in some ways is still remembered as the greatest, and that was part of a kind of golden age for Rome. And Virgil was Augustus's favorite poet, and he was patronized by the emperor and things like that. And one of the ways to think about the Aeneid is as a patriotic poem, that it's the origins of Rome, well, in an indirect way, the origins of Rome in its sort of celebratory setting. Now, when I say the origins of Rome, actually, the city of Rome doesn't appear in the poem, but what it's designed to do is give the ancestry of Rome. You might have heard the story of Romulus and Remus, who were the twins who co-founded Rome. And the guy that the Aeneid is about, Aeneas, lived a long time before Romulus and Remus, but he's considered to be the ancestor of Rome because he brought Greek culture to Italy. Greek culture kind of implanted itself in Italy, and then eventually it turned into the actual city of Rome. The Romans were crazy about Greek culture. I mean, this is the most commonplace observation anyone can have if they pay attention to Roman art. It's all a ripoff of the Greeks. The paintings, the sculpture, the theater, and the poetry all were powerfully influenced by the Greeks, at least as influenced as American art has been by the British. That Homer was somebody for the Greeks the way Shakespeare is somebody for modern American culture. Now, Virgil lived at least 800 years after Homer. We don't quite know when Homer wrote, maybe it wasn't as much as 800 years, but it was many centuries. And Homer, as I think I told you when we did the Odyssey, is kind of lost in the mists of time, and we don't really know who he was or if he even existed exactly. Virgil, that's not a problem. Virgil, we know a lot of things about. And Virgil was consciously emulating Homer. He wanted to do for Rome what Homer had done for Greece. And he was also intimidated by the challenge of that. He once said that trying to lift a verse from Homer is like trying to lift the club of Hercules. He sometimes felt unequal to the task. But that's why when you read the excerpt I've given you, if it reminds you of anything about the Odyssey, that's not a coincidence. The first 6 books of the Aeneid is in 12 books and was never quite finished. But the first 6 books are known as the Odysseic Aeneid because they remind people of the Odyssey. And the last 6 books of the Aeneid are called the Iliadic Aeneid because they remind people of the Iliad. In the last 6 books, Aeneas is on Italy and has to fight like crazy. There's all kinds of people who want to wipe out the new Trojan colony, and he has to fight like crazy. And so what you get in the Iliad, all these battle scenes and mighty feats of arms being done, that shows up in the last half of the Aeneid. While the journeying, trying to get to where you need to go, is the first half of the Aeneid, and that's where I've taken the excerpt from. In this excerpt, Aeneas and his men have washed up at Carthage, which was a city in North Africa. What's today is Tunis in Tunisia. And the thing that's interesting about that location is that except for the Straits of Gibraltar, which are right at the western edge of the Mediterranean Sea, except for there, Carthage is on the African side of the narrowest part of the Mediterranean. And so it's where Africa is closest to Europe, and it's a really good place if you're a trading empire with a good navy, which is what Carthage was. However, in the time of the excerpt we're reading, Carthage was just founded by Queen Dido, who was a Phoenician queen. Phoenicia is in modern-day Lebanon. And the Phoenicians were a seafaring people and sent out, and Queen Dido had to get away from her brother, who she was locked in a power struggle with, and so she started a new city at Carthage. And that's where Aeneas and his band of refugees wash up. And you'll see in this excerpt, Aeneas is telling the story of the fall of Troy, because Aeneas was a prince on the Trojan side. That's important. The Trojan War, there were the there were the Greeks under Agamemnon and with people like Achilles and Odysseus and so forth on that side. And the Trojan side, you had heroes like Hector and Aeneas was considered one of the Trojan heroes. I think his domain where he came from wasn't Troy itself. It was like an allied state with Troy. But anyway, Aeneas was considered one of the great Trojan warriors. And the conceit of this story is that Aeneas managed to escape the destruction of Troy and sail off with his men and ended up founding a new colony in Italy, which eventually turned into Rome. And the Romans wanted the story to go this way, though it very well could be entirely legendary. But the Romans wanted the story to go that way because they loved the idea that they were descended from the Greeks. And the Trojans were a Greek culture, even if they were based in Turkey, what's now Turkey. That's still like they come from the Greeks, and that's what the Romans wanted to think about themselves. Those were the ancestors they wanted to have. As I say, nobody knows they really did, but it worked for them. And so Virgil wrote a poem, the Aeneid, based on Aeneas, basically the story of Aeneas. And it starts out, he washes up on shore with Dido, and he tells her the story of the fall of Troy, which is most of what you're going to be reading. And that's where you get things like the Trojan horse. The Trojan horse is never mentioned in either the Iliad or the Odyssey. It's come down to us from the Aeneid. And, that'll be part of what's in there. So I guess the other things you might think about as you read this, it is a story in verse and it's a story of the wanderings of a hero. So it resembles the Odyssey that way. Aeneas has a different sort of personality than Odysseus. He's humbler, and they're always calling him pious Aeneas because he's considered a man who gives the respect that is due to the gods and also the respect that is due to people like his father, because that was filial piety was a very high virtue in both the ancient Greek and the ancient Roman world. And Aeneas is supposed to kind of exemplify it. And you'll see stuff about him carrying his crippled father on his back, things like that. By the way, the part we don't read, in which the Iliadic Aeneid, where Aeneas and his men fight all these battles, one of the things that's interesting about them is that when the Romans describe warfare, it looks different than when the Greeks describe warfare. In the Iliad, it's all these individuals going on rampages. In Virgil, the units are much better coordinated militarily. The Romans see war as a team sport, and the Greeks tended to see it as an individual sport. And the notion lurks in my head that that's why the Romans did so well, because of their attitude towards warfare and the cooperation between their soldiers and their units. But that's just a little sidebar. So I guess the most important thing to remember is that this is a legend of the ancestors from Rome at its peak, and can tell you things about who the Romans like to think of themselves as. All right, I think I'll leave it at that. I don't remember anything else that I need to tell you.